I shouldn't have stopped moving. The rule for people like me, the invisible ones, is that once you stop, the world finally sees you. But the gilded ceiling of the Grand Plaza was beginning to spin, a swirling vortex of gold leaf and crystal that felt more real than the ground beneath my feet. My lungs burned, each breath a serrated blade slicing through my chest. I'd been running for 20 minutes, but my body had been dying for weeks. $60 in my pocket and a ghost in my shadow. That was the price of a life spent hiding in the cracks of the city. I tried to blend into the crowd of high society shoppers, a smudge of gray against their designer silks. I caught a glimpse of myself in the tinted window of a luxury boutique, black curls matted with sweat, skin the color of parched earth. I looked like a haunted house in human form. My fingers brushed the hem of my shirt, flinching when they grazed the debt marks hidden beneath the cotton. The bruises on my ribs felt like molten lead, poolsing in time with the jagged scar on my cheek. The air in the atrium suddenly changed, turning cold and sharp enough to draw blood. The chatter died, replaced by a silence so heavy it made my ears ring. That's when the sea of suits parted and he stepped through. Silver hair, eyes like frozen steel, and a tan blazer that looked more like armor than fashion. He was the sun and the storm all at once. My knees didn't just buckle, they surrendered. I braced for the impact of the cold marble, but it never came. Instead, the world smelled of expensive tobacco and impending war as tattooed hands caught me. And the last thing I saw was the man they called a monster looking at my bruises like he was ready to burn the world down. The silk against my skin felt like a mockery. It was too soft, too cool, and far too expensive for someone who had spent the last 3 nights sleeping on a flattened cardboard box behind a dumpster. I kept my eyes pressed shut, trying to hold onto the darkness, because the darkness was safe. In the darkness, I was still a ghost. But the smell was wrong. Instead of the damp rot of the city's underbelly, there was the scent of sandalwood, ozone, and sterilized air. My eyes snapped open. The ceiling was a vast expanse of matte charcoal, illuminated by recessed lighting that glowed like embers. I tried to sit up, but a sharp, white-hot spike of pain shot from my ribs to my collarbone, pinning me back against the pillows. A soft moan escaped my throat, a sound of pure, helpless vulnerability that I hated. "Don't. You have 2 cracked ribs and a fever that hasn't fully broken." The voice was like velvet wrapped around a blade. I turned my head slowly. He was sitting in a low-slung leather armchair in the corner of the room, his long legs crossed at the ankles. Beak Jinti. He had discarded the tan blazer, and his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the dark, intricate ink that crawled up his throat like ivy. In the dim light, his slicked-back silver hair looked like moonlight. I clutched the duvet to my chest, my heart hammering against my damaged ribs. "Where am I?" "My home," he said, his voice flat. "A place where the men who were hunting you cannot breathe without my permission." He stood up and the atmosphere in the room tightened. He didn't walk, he prowled. As he approached the bed, I saw the sheer scale of him, the breadth of his shoulders, and the terrifying stillness in his eyes. He stopped at the edge of the mattress and reached out. I flinched, pulling back, but his hand was steady. He didn't touch my skin. Instead, he used a blunt fingernail to hook the collar of the oversized silk shirt I'd been changed into, pulling it just enough to expose the dark, mottled bruising on my collarbone. His face didn't move, but his eyes darkened until they were almost black. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "These marks," he murmured, his thumb finally brushing the edge of a deep purple bruise. "They have a specific signature. The pressure, the pattern, it belongs to the Black Vipers, specifically Park Sang-woo's personal enforcers." I swallowed hard, my throat feeling like it was full of glass. "I don't know who that is." "Liars don't last long in this room, Vanessa." Hearing my name in his mouth felt like a brand. I hadn't told him my name. I hadn't told anyone my name in months. He saw the flicker of terror in my eyes and leaned in closer, his shadow swallowing me whole. "I know you were a student. I know you've been living in the tunnels, and I know that the Vipers don't mark people unless they intend to harvest them or silence them." He straightened up, his silhouette looming over me, a perfect blend of a savior and a jailer. "You are in the dragon's den now. Outside those doors, you are a corpse. Inside, you are mine." "I'm not anyone's property," I whispered, though my voice trembled. Jinty leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating from him. "Property? No, you are a witness. And until I decide what to do with you, you will eat when I tell you, sleep when I tell you, and you will tell me exactly what you saw in that alleyway 3 nights ago." He reached out and traced the small, jagged scar on my cheek with his thumb. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a jarring contrast to the lethal promise in his tone. "The Vipers took your safety. I am taking your freedom. It's a fair trade for your life, don't you think?" He turned to leave, his boots clicking rhythmically against the polished hardwood. "Wait," I called out, my voice cracking. He paused at the door, the silver of his hair catching the light one last time. He didn't turn around. "Why do you care?" I asked. "You're a boss. Why stoop to pick up a ghost from the street?" "Because," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl, "the men who bruised you are the only men I hate more than myself. Sleep, Vanessa. The war starts tomorrow." The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing like a gavel. I was safe from the Vipers, but as I looked around the gilded cage of the penthouse, I realized I had simply traded one predator for another. Breakfast was served on a silver tray by a man who moved with the silence of a shadow, but I couldn't touch it. The steam rising from the congee smelled like heaven, yet my stomach was a tight knot of apprehension. I was sitting by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, wrapped in a robe that cost more than my tuition ever had, watching the city breathe below me. From up here, the people looked like ants. From down there, I had been nothing at all. The heavy thud of the door announced his arrival before I saw him. Jinty had changed into a charcoal suit, the fabric pulling taut across his shoulders. He didn't ask if I'd slept. He didn't ask how I felt. He simply sat across from me and placed a rugged, encrypted tablet on the table. "The fever is gone, which means your mind is clear," he began, his voice cutting through the hum of the air conditioning. "The Black Vipers don't chase undocumented girls across the city for a debt. They have collectors for that. They sent specialized hunters for you. Why?" I looked away, focusing on a smudge on the glass. I was in the wrong place. I was just looking for a dry place to sleep. "In the abandoned shipyard on 4th. Jinty's eyes were narrowed, tracking the tremor in my hands. "That's Viper territory. They were moving something or someone." The memory hit me like a physical blow. The smell of salt air and rust, the flickering yellow light of a kerosene lamp, the sound of a muffled plea followed by the wet, sickening thud of a silenced gunshot. I closed my eyes, but the image was burned into my retinas. "I saw them," I whispered, the words feeling like lead in my mouth. "I was behind a stack of shipping crates. There were 3 of them. They had a man on his knees. He was begging. He said he had the files, that he hadn't told the police anything." Jinty went perfectly still. The predatory aura he carried didn't vanish. It sharpened, focusing entirely on me. "The man, describe him." "Older, gray suit. He had a gold lapel pin, a small scale." Jinty's hand tightened on the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white, the tattoos on his fingers stretching. "Councilman O," he muttered to himself, "the city's lead prosecutor." He swiped a finger across the tablet and turned it toward me. It was a digital missing poster, but not the kind the police put out. This was an underworld bulletin, circulated on the dark web. It featured a grainy CCTV still of me from a week ago, ducking into an alleyway. The bounty at the bottom had enough zeros to buy a block of the city. "You're not just a witness, Vanessa," Jinty said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "You are the missing girl. Park Sang-woo has put a hit on you that has every mercenary from here to Busan looking for your head. You saw him pull the trigger. Didn't you? I nodded slowly, a tear finally escaping and tracking down my scarred cheek. He looked right at the crates. I ran before he could check, but he saw my hair. He saw me. Jin-T stood up and began to pace, the lethal grace of his movement more pronounced than ever. He wasn't just angry, he was calculating. The prosecutor was my leverage against the Vipers. With him dead and the files missing, Sang-woo thought he was in the clear. But he left a loose end. A girl who can put him behind bars, or better yet, a girl I can use to tear his empire down brick by brick. He stopped in front of me, leaning down until our foreheads nearly touched. The darkening rage I'd seen in the lobby was back, but this time it wasn't directed at me. It was a cold, protective fire. They want to silence you because you're the only person left who can hurt them, he said. But they forgot one thing. To get to you, they have to walk through me. And I don't just protect what's mine, Vanessa. I destroy anything that touches it. The power dynamic shifted in that moment. I wasn't just a stray he'd picked up. I was the most dangerous weapon in his arsenal, and for the first time, the fear of being his prisoner was eclipsed by the terrifying realization that I was now the center of a war. The following week was a blur of gilded luxury and grueling discipline. Jin-T did not believe in soft recoveries. If I was to be a weapon in his war, he intended to sharpen the blade himself. The penthouse transformed. Packages arrived hourly, heavy silks, supple leathers, and cashmere that felt like a second skin. He didn't ask for my sizes, he simply knew them. He replaced my oversized white t-shirt with a wardrobe fit for a queen, yet it felt like a uniform for a role I hadn't auditioned for. The food was no longer just survival, it was fuel. High-protein meals and bitter medicinal teas were delivered by a silent staff who never met my eyes. But the real change happened in the renovated gym at the back of the suite. Again, the trainer barked. Her name was Min, a woman with a buzz cut and eyes like flint. I swung at the heavy bag, my bruised ribs screaming in protest. I was clumsy, my movements slowed by weeks of starvation and the lingering trauma of the docks. Min didn't care. She taught me how to find a man's throat with my thumb, how to turn my weight into a weapon, and how to ignore the instinct to beg for mercy. Jin-T watched from the doorway, a silent, silver-haired specter draped in an expensive wool coat, his expression unreadable. Late that evening, the training ended, leaving me shaking and slick with sweat. I found Jin-T out on the balcony, the winter wind whipping his white shirt against his frame. He was nursing a glass of dark amber liquid, his gaze fixed on the neon sprawl of the city. "You're improving," he said without turning around. "Min says your instincts are sharp. You don't fight like a victim. You fight like someone who has already died once." I walked to the railing, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm tired of running, Jin-T, but I don't know if I can be what you want me to be." He turned then, and the harsh patio lights caught the ink on his neck. Up close, the tattoos weren't just decorative, they were a roadmap of pain. I found myself reaching out, my fingers hovering inches from the dark lines that disappeared under his collar. "What do they mean?" I whispered. "The tiger on your throat, the scales on your hands." He didn't pull away. Instead, he set his glass down and unbuttoned his cuff, rolling back his sleeve to reveal a sprawling masterpiece of traditional black and gray ink. "In our world, we wear our sins on our skin," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate resonance. He pointed to the tiger's eyes. "This was for the brother I couldn't save. The scales on my hands are not for justice, but for debt. Every life I've taken, every betrayal I've survived, it's etched here so I never forget the cost of power." He took my hand, his grip warm and calloused. He turned my palm over, tracing the faint lines of my life with his thumb. "You see your bruises as marks of shame, Vanessa. I see them as a tally of what the world owes you. I wear my ink by choice. You were marked by force, but the result is the same." The distance between us vanished. For a heartbeat, the Mafia boss and the missing girl were gone, replaced by two people bound by the gravity of their scars. I could smell the sharp tang of his whiskey and the cold scent of the coming snow. "I won't let them add another mark to you," he murmured, his face inches from mine. His thumb moved to the scar on my cheek, his touch lingering with a tenderness that terrified me more than his rage ever could. "But to keep you safe, I have to make you like me. Cold, lethal, unbreakable." He let go of my hand, the sudden loss of contact feeling like a physical chill. He turned back to the city, the hero mask sliding back into place. "Go to sleep, Vanessa. Tomorrow we start the real work. The Vipers are moving, and I need you ready to strike back." I left him there, a silver king overlooking a kingdom of glass and shadows, wondering if I was being saved or simply being prepared for a different kind of slaughter. The silence of the penthouse was always heavy, but tonight it felt brittle, like glass under tension. I was in the library, staring at a sketch I'd started, the first time I'd picked up a pencil in months, when the world suddenly turned inside out. The explosion wasn't a roar. It was a localized thud that shattered the reinforced glass of the north balcony. The vacuum of the high-altitude wind rushed in, screaming, and then the lights went black. "Vanessa, get down." Jinty's voice sliced through the chaos before I even realized I was screaming. I dived behind a heavy mahogany desk just as a hail of gunfire chewed through the books above my head, sending white feathers of paper snowing down into the dark. Red laser dots danced across the walls, searching for a heartbeat. Jinty was a shadow in motion. He didn't fumble. He didn't hesitate. He was already across the room, a sleek black submachine gun appearing in his hand as if summoned from the air. He fired in short, disciplined bursts, the muzzle flashes illuminating his face in staccato bursts of white light. His silver hair looked like jagged lightning in the strobe-like gloom. There on the terrace, 6 men, he shouted over the deafening rattle of lead. 2 men in tactical gear vaulted over the shattered window frame. They weren't debt collectors. They were professional assassins, moving with a lethal synchronization that could only belong to the Vipers. One aimed directly at the desk where I was huddled. I saw the barrel level with my head. Time slowed to a crawl. I was a ghost again, staring into the mouth of the abyss. Then, a wall of tan wool and solid muscle slammed into me. Jinty didn't just pull me away, he threw his entire body over mine, pinning me to the floor. The air was knocked out of my lungs as his weight crushed me into the rug. Above us, the desk disintegrated under a fresh barrage. I heard a sharp, wet hiss of air and felt a sudden jolt ripple through Jinty's frame. He didn't groan, but his grip on my shoulders tightened until it bruised. He rolled, pulling a handgun from his waistband and firing 3 shots upward without looking. 2 heavy thuds followed. Then, silence, save for the whistling wind and the frantic thrumming of my own pulse. "Are you hit?" he rasped. His breath was hot against my ear, smelling of coffee and adrenaline. "No," I choked out, my hands shaking as I reached up to him. Jinty, you're bleeding." I felt it then. The heat. My fingers came away slick and dark. The white fabric of his shirt was rapidly turning crimson at the shoulder, where a bullet had carved a shallow, jagged trench through the muscle. He ignored it, his eyes scanning the room with a terrifying, predatory focus. "It's a graze," he said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous growl that made my skin prickle. "Stay behind me. Don't let go of my belt. If I move, you move." He stood up, pulling me with him. He was a wounded god, blood dripping from his fingertips onto the expensive rug, yet he looked more powerful than ever. The hero I had seen in the lobby was gone, replaced by the monster the underworld feared. "They found us," I whispered, the terror threatening to swallow me. "They found a grave," Jinty corrected, his face hardening into a mask of silver and stone. He checked his magazine, the click echoing in the ruined room. Park Sang-woo just made the last mistake of his life. He touched what belongs to me. He led me toward the hidden service elevator, his body positioned perfectly to shield mine from any remaining angles of fire. As we descended into the belly of the building, the metallic scent of his blood filled the small space. I looked at the red smear on my own hands, his blood, shed for a girl he barely knew. The war hadn't just started. It had arrived at our doorstep, and for the first time, I wasn't just running from the Vipers. I was marching alongside the man who was going to end them. The sleek black SUV carved through the winding mountain passes, its tires biting into the fresh dusting of snow. Inside, the only sound was the low hum of the heater and Jin-T's shallow, disciplined breathing. He refused to let me drive, his left hand steady on the wheel while his right arm hung slightly stiff, the shoulder bandaged hastily with a strip of my own shirt. By the time we reached the villa, a brutalist masterpiece of glass and cedar tucked into the jagged cliffs, the sun was a bruised purple smudge on the horizon. This wasn't a penthouse. It was a fortress disguised as a sanctuary. "Inside," he commanded, his voice raspy. The interior was cold, smelling of pine and dormant hearths. I didn't wait for him to ask. I guided him to a low velvet sofa, pushing his hand away when he tried to shrug off his coat. "You're losing blood, Jin-T. Sit. Let me look at it." For the first time, the boss vanished. He sank into the cushions, his head dropping back against the headrest, eyes fluttering shut. I fetched a medical kit from the kitchen, my hands surprisingly steady. The training Min had put me through hadn't just taught me how to strike, it had taught me how to stay calm when the world was bleeding. I peeled back the makeshift bandage. The bullet had taken a chunk of flesh, leaving a jagged red canyon across his shoulder. As I cleaned the wound with antiseptic, his muscles corded, a low hiss escaping his teeth. "You're surprisingly good at this," he murmured, his eyes opening just enough to track my movements. "Most people would be shaking." "I spent 3 years in art school studying anatomy so I could draw it," I said, my voice soft as I began to stitch the edges of the wound. I didn't think I'd be using that knowledge to keep a Mafia boss from bleeding out in the Catskills. He let out a short, dry chuckle that turned into a wince. "The missing girl has claws and a steady hand." I looked up, meeting his gaze. In the dim light of the villa, the lethal edge in his eyes had softened into something raw, something human. I saw the exhaustion etched into the lines around his mouth, the weight of 1,000 violent decisions resting on his brow. Behind the silver hair and the expensive suits, there was just a man who had forgotten how to rest. "Why did you jump in front of me?" I asked, the needle poised midair. "You could have stayed behind the desk. You could have let the mercenaries have me." Jin-T reached out with his good hand, his fingers grazing my jaw, tilting my face toward the light. "I told you, you belong to me." "That's a lie," I whispered. "You don't protect property like that. You protect things you're afraid to lose." A heavy silence settled between us, thicker than the mountain mist outside. His thumb traced the curve of my bottom lip, a touch so tentative it broke my heart. In that moment, the power dynamic didn't just shift, it collapsed. He wasn't my captor, and I wasn't his pawn. We were just two broken things trying to find a reason to keep fighting. "You have a spirit that hasn't been extinguished, Vanessa," he said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to echo in my bones. "Every time the world tried to crush you, you just became harder to break. I spent my whole life surrounding myself with people who bow. I forgot what it was like to look at someone who stands tall even when their knees are shaking." I finished the last stitch and taped the gauze down, my fingers lingering on his skin. I could feel the steady, powerful thrum of his heart. I realized then that I wasn't looking at a monster anymore. I was looking at a man who wore a monster's skin to keep the world at bay. "Get some sleep, Jin-T," I said, pulling a throw blanket over his legs. He grabbed my wrist, his grip firm but not forceful. "Stay, just until I drift off." I sat on the floor beside the sofa, leaning my head against the cushions near his hand. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, but inside, for the first time in my life, the shadows didn't feel like they were hunting me. They felt like they were standing guard. The piece of the mountain villa was an illusion, a fragile glass bubble that shattered the moment the sun began to set on our third day. Jinti had been restless. His wound was healing, the skin puckering over my neat stitches, but the phone calls were becoming more frequent, hushed, guttural conversations in Korean that left him looking like a man haunted by ghosts. "I have to go down to the city," he told me that afternoon, standing by the cedar-framed door. He was back in a suit, the charcoal wool hiding the bandage on his shoulder, though he carried himself with a slight, rigid hitch. "A meeting with the council elders. They're nervous about the Viper's aggression. If I don't show my face, they'll think I'm weak." "Is it safe?" I asked, my heart doing a slow, heavy roll in my chest. He stepped closer, his thumb grazing my jawline in that lingering, proprietary way that had become my only anchor. "The villa is off-grid. My second Minho is stationed at the base of the trail with 10 men. You are invisible here, Vanessa. I'll be back before the snow thickens." I watched his car disappear into the white fog of the mountain pass, feeling a cold dread settle in the pit of my stomach. I tried to distract myself with a charcoal pencil and a sketchbook, but the lines kept coming out jagged and sharp. I found myself drawing his eyes, those silver-gray depths that promised both ruin and rescue. 2 hours later, the perimeter alarms didn't go off. There was no screaming siren, no flash of red lights. There was only the sound of a heavy door being unlocked with a master key. I stood up, the sketchbook falling to the floor. Jinti. The man who entered wasn't Jinti. It was Minho, the man Jinti called his brother, the one who had stood by his side since they were teenagers in the slums of Seoul. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood 4 men in the familiar black tactical gear of the Black Vipers. "Minho," I whispered, backing away toward the kitchen where the knives were kept. "What are you doing?" Minho didn't look at me. His face was a mask of calculated regret. "The Biko Syndicate is a sinking ship, Vanessa. Jinti has gone soft because of a girl he picked up off the street. Park Sang-woo offered me a seat at a table that isn't burning. It's just business." "He trusted you," I spat, my fingers curling around the handle of a paring knife hidden behind my back. "He shouldn't have," Minho replied. He stepped aside and the Viper enforcers surged forward. I fought. I didn't beg, and I didn't scream for mercy. I remembered everything Min had taught me in the gym. I drove the knife into the first man's forearm and used my weight to slam another against the cedar pillar. For a fleeting second, I saw the surprise in their eyes. The missing girl wasn't a victim anymore. But I was one girl against 4 professional killers. A heavy blow to the back of my head sent the world spinning into a kaleidoscope of gray and red. I hit the floor hard, the taste of copper filling my mouth. As they dragged me toward the door, my face scraping against the cold hardwood, I saw Minho standing over my fallen sketchbook. He looked at the drawing of Jinti, then crushed the paper under his boot. "Tell the boss he can find his property at the old ironworks." One of the Vipers laughed, tossing a black hood over my head. The last thing I felt was the biting mountain air on my skin as I was shoved into a van. The sanctuary was gone. The shadows were no longer standing guard. They had finally closed in. I was no longer a ghost or a witness. I was a lure, and I knew that when Jinti found out, the city wouldn't just see a war, it would see an apocalypse. The smell of the ironworks was the smell of death, stagnant water, rusted metal, and the heavy, sweet scent of old blood. I was bound to a metal chair in the center of a cavernous warehouse, a single swinging bulb casting long, flickering shadows that danced like demons on the walls. My head throbbed from the blow at the villa, and my lip was split, the blood drying in a salty crust. Park Sang-woo stood before me, looking every bit the nightmare I had seen at the docks. He didn't wear a suit like Jinty. He wore a black leather duster and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Where are the files, Vanessa?" he asked, his voice a low, melodic purr. He leaned in, the tip of a serrated blade tracing the line of my jaw right over the scar I'd carried for months. "The prosecutor told us you took them. He said you were the one who crawled through the vents." I spat blood onto his polished boots. "The prosecutor is dead because you're a coward, and I'm not telling you a damn thing." The backhand came fast, snapping my head to the side. The world tilted, the iron taste in my mouth intensifying. One of his enforcers stepped forward, gripping my hair and pulling my head back until my neck felt like it would snap. "You have a lot of spirit for a girl who was begging for scraps in the plaza," Sangwoo whispered, pressing the cold steel of the knife against the debt mark on my neck. "Is Jinty worth this? Does he even know your real name, or are you just a stray he's keeping until the novelty wears off?" I looked him in the eye, ignoring the flare of pain in my ribs. I thought of the mountain villa. I thought of Jinty's hand on mine, explaining the tiger on his throat and the weight of his sins. He had seen a warrior in me when I only saw a ghost. "He knows enough," I wheezed, a defiant smile pulling at my bruised lips. "He knows exactly where to find you, and when he gets here, he isn't going to arrest you. He's going to erase you." Sangwoo's face contorted with rage. He signaled to the man behind me. "Break her fingers, one for every minute she stays silent." While the first snap of bone echoed through the warehouse, 40 miles away, Beak Jinty was standing in the wreckage of the mountain villa. He didn't scream, and he didn't throw things. He stood in the center of the room, staring at the crushed drawing of his own face, his expression so cold it seemed to drop the temperature of the room by 10 degrees. Min, the trainer, stood behind him, her face pale. "The elders won't back you, boss. They say it's a trap. If you go into the ironworks, it's a suicide mission. Minho has given them all our entry codes." Jinty didn't look at her. He reached down and picked up the sketchbook, smoothing the wrinkled paper with a thumb that trembled only slightly. "The elders care about territory. I care about the girl who saved my life when she didn't even know my name." He walked to the wall, punching a code into a hidden keypad. A concealed armory slid open, revealing an array of hardware that would have leveled a small city. He didn't reach for a submachine gun. He reached for a traditional short sword and a pair of customized handguns. "Boss, you're still injured," Min protested. "Your shoulder." "My shoulder is fine," Jinty said, his voice a hollow, echoing growl. He put on his tan blazer, the one he'd been wearing the day he caught her. It was a signal. The hero was dead. Only the monster remained. I don't need an army to kill a snake, I just need a reason, and Sangwoo just gave me the best one I've ever had. He walked out into the snow, the silver of his hair blending into the whiteout conditions. He knew he was walking into a slaughterhouse. He knew Minho would be waiting. But as he climbed into the car, his eyes weren't on the road. They were on the horizon, toward the girl who had dared to stand tall when the world told her to crawl. The ironworks had been transformed into a macabre theater of triumph. Upstairs, in the glass-walled mezzanine, Park Sangwoo was hosting a blood gala to celebrate the acquisition of Jinty's territory. The clink of champagne flutes and the forced laughter of corrupt officials drifted down into the damp darkness of the lower levels, mocking the silence of my cell. They had left me alone for a moment, my hands zip-tied behind my back, my left index finger throbbing with a dull, sickening heat. But they had made one fatal mistake. They still saw me as an artist, not a soldier. I leaned back against the rusted iron pillar, my breath coming in shallow hitches. I didn't need a knife. I needed a tool. With a groan of effort, I shifted my weight, catching the edge of my zip ties on a jagged, protruding shard of oxidized metal. I sawed the plastic against the rust, the friction burning my skin, but I didn't stop until the ties snapped. My hands were free, but I was still trapped. I looked at the electrical junction box on the wall, the heart of the building's security. To anyone else, it was a mess of wires. To me, it was a composition. I remembered the blueprints Jinty had made me study at the villa, the way he'd traced the veins of a building like he was tracing the ink on his skin. I grabbed a discarded piece of copper wire and a shard of glass. With the precision of a woman who had spent years mastering fine-line charcoal drawings, I began to edit the security board. I wasn't just cutting wires. I was rewiring the logic, grounding the sensors, and creating a feedback loop that would blind every camera in the facility. Suddenly, a heavy, rhythmic boom echoed from the front gates, then another. The music upstairs cut out. The gala went silent. I climbed to a high catwalk, peering through the shadows. A single set of headlights pierced the gloom of the main floor. A car had been driven straight through the reinforced steel doors. The driver's side door opened, and Beak Jinty stepped out. He looked like a ghost in the moonlight. He wore his tan blazer, unbuttoned and swaying in the wind, his silver hair a beacon of defiance. He walked into the center of the kill zone, his hands raised, completely unarmed. "Sangwoo," his voice roared, echoing off the corrugated steel. "You wanted the king. Here I am. Come and take the crown." From the mezzanine, dozens of red laser dots converged on Jinty's chest. Sangwoo appeared at the railing, flanked by Minho and a dozen gunmen. "You came alone, for a girl who isn't even yours." "I'm never alone," Jinty said, his eyes flicking toward the shadows where I was perched. That was my cue. I jammed the copper wire into the main terminal and slammed the glass shard into the manual override. The building screamed. Every light in the ironworks exploded in a shower of sparks. The heavy industrial shutters began to slam shut, sealing the exits, while the fire suppression system hissed to life, filling the air with a thick, choking fog. In the sudden pitch-black chaos, the Vipers panicked, their laser sights useless in the mist. "Now," I screamed. The darkness was Jinty's element. I heard the wet slide of a blade and the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of his customized handguns. He wasn't just fighting, he was performing a symphony of vengeance. I dived from the catwalk onto the shoulders of a guard below, using my weight to drive him into the concrete, my hands finding his throat just as Min had taught me. I wasn't a witness anymore. I was the architect of their downfall. Through the fog, I saw the flash of silver hair moving toward me, a predator coming to claim what was his. The gala was over, and the reckoning had begun. The strobe lights of the short-circuiting electrical board flickered over the carnage like a dying pulse. In the chaos of the fog and the dark, Jinty moved like a vengeful god, his silver hair the last thing the Vipers saw before the end. He reached me just as the last of Sangwoo's inner circle fell, his hands, slick with the blood of men who had dared to touch me, finding my face with a desperate, crushing tenderness. "Vanessa," he breathed, his forehead dropping against mine. He smelled of cordite and cold iron, but to me he smelled like home. The mezzanine was a tomb. Park Sangwoo sat slumped against the glass railing, his leather duster shredded, his leg shattered from a well-placed round. He looked up at Jinty, a bloody snarl on his lips. You think you've won? You're a monster, Beak, just like me." Jinty stepped over the debris, his handgun leveled with a steady, terrifying calm. He didn't look at the man as a rival anymore. He looked at him as a mistake that needed to be erased. "No," Jinty said, his voice a low, final vibration. "I'm the man who protects what's his. You're just a ghost who hasn't realized he's dead yet." The gunshot echoed once, a sharp punctuation mark that ended the Black Viper's reign forever. Jinty didn't stay to watch the body fall. He turned back to me, lifting me into his arms in a classic protective carry, the same way he had in the hotel lobby, but this time I wasn't unconscious. This time, I wrapped my arms around his neck, my broken finger resting against the tiger tattoo on his throat. 6 months later, The air in the Brooklyn studio was thick with the scent of turpentine and fresh jasmine. The high, industrial windows let in a flood of golden afternoon light, illuminating the canvases that lined the walls. They weren't sketches of ghosts or shadows anymore. They were vibrant, explosive portraits of a city being reborn. I stood before a large canvas, my brush hovering over a streak of silver paint. My finger had healed, leaving only a slight, barely visible crookedness that I wore like a badge of honor. Outside the heavy oak doors, two of Jinti's best men stood watch, not as my jailers, but as my shadow. The door opened, and the familiar scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco filled the room. Jinti walked in, his tan blazer draped over his shoulders, his silver hair styled back with that same lethal elegance. He didn't stay by the door. He walked right into my space, standing behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. "The elders are complaining again," he murmured into the crook of my neck, his lips grazing the scar on my jaw. "They say the new queen is spending too much on the survivors' clinic and not enough on the docks." I leaned back against him, my head resting on his shoulder, the same shoulder I had once stitched back together. "Tell the elders that the docks are silent because I said so, and tell them if they have a problem, they can come speak to the artist." Jinti chuckled, a warm, rich sound that made the ink on his chest press against my back. He didn't command me. He didn't own me. We stood there as equals, two architects of a new world built on the ruins of the old one. I turned in his arms, my paint-stained hands reaching up to trace the lines of his face. The missing girl was long gone, and the Mafia boss had found something worth more than power. We were no longer running through the cracks of the city. We were the ones who owned the light. "Is the painting finished?" he asked, looking at the silver streak on the canvas. "Almost," I whispered, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted of victory and peace. "It just needed a little more light." The end. If you love this story, kindly subscribe to this channel and stay tuned as I bring more stories to you.